1829, the first school opened. It was a private boys' school in town. And then 8 years later, the Raleigh Female Academy was opened to offer classes to refined young women in town. Now, a year before the girls' school was incorporated, in May of 1836, the Raleigh Methodist Church was founded. And 5 years later, a Presbyterian church began holding services in the town. Now, because they have a very nice courthouse, a two-story brick courthouse, a jail, at least 2 schools, a couple of churches, the population in Raleigh grew dramatically. And by 1836, there were 1,500 people who lived in Raleigh. And compare that to 906 people who lived in Memphis. So Raleigh was a much bigger town at that point, much bigger than Memphis. However, Raleigh's economy, despite prospering in the 1820s and the 1830s, Memphis soon began to outpace Raleigh by the end of the decade, as steamboats filled with cotton and other river trade jammed the city's levee. Now, a plank road was constructed in 1850 between Raleigh and Memphis, but it came too late to halt Raleigh's decline as a leading Shelby County community. In 1843, the Second Tennessee Circuit Court was assigned to Memphis instead of Raleigh. And this began the process of the court system leaving Raleigh for the larger Memphis. Other courts relocated to the Bluff City during the 1850s, and in May of 1866, the legislature formally named Memphis the county seat of Shelby County. Although they lost the courts, Raleigh residents were sitting on natural resources that had the potential to transform this small community into a large resort area. Sometime in the 1830s, a family from Virginia camped beside one of Raleigh's many freshwater springs. Remember, Taps Hole has a spring nearby. Well, they stopped at the spring to nurse a sick child, a baby, who was not expected to live. However, when the baby was given spring water to drink, so the story goes, it made a complete recovery, and the family resumed their journey. Now, this is a great story. However, it might not be anything more than an overzealous salesman who was trying to sell mineral water, which soon began sold in Memphis stores and also some Raleigh stores. And it was named Baby Spring Mineral Water. And it was advertised as being able to cure whatever ailed you. And it brought this baby back to life. And it was sold mostly as a cure for colitis, although it was used for other home remedies as well. Now, as the water from Baby Springs was being first bottled, a man named Dr. David Coleman developed a resort spa at the mineral spring closest to what was Taps Hole. A few hotels began to spring up near Taps Hole and near that mineral spring. In fact, Dr. Coleman's brothers, R.H. and R.F. Coleman, opened the Franklin House. And people began to flock to Raleigh to experience these healing waters. For example, in 1866, a newspaper advertisement declared that the compounding of so many valuable minerals in such a happy combinations in these waters guarantees to the invalid that the great apothecary has designed them for the healing of his creatures. Not necessarily very well written, but nevertheless it's saying God came down to Raleigh, gave them this wonderful water, and it'll heal you if you've got trouble. And so people believed these things and began to come to Raleigh. However, it was still rather difficult to get here, even from Memphis. The plank road was here. But other than that, it was difficult for Memphians to come out to Raleigh to experience the waters. And so it was decided in the early 1870s to build a narrow gauge passenger railroad. And what that means, it was just one railroad track with one car. And it began operating in 1873. Now the train would leave Raleigh at 7:30 in the morning, and it would arrive in Memphis at the Louisville Railroad Depot downtown an hour and a half later. So it would take you an hour and a half to get from here to downtown Memphis. Now can you imagine? Now during the day, the train would come back and forth to Memphis 2 times. And it would bring people to Raleigh to visit the springs, or visit travelers. If somebody came to Memphis on a larger railroad and wanted to spend some time at Raleigh, they would do that. But not enough people took advantage of it, and the railroad closed 2 years later in 1875. But the track is still there, okay, in 1875. And so, in 1875, a man named Benjamin N. Duke, who was the heir to his family's large tobacco fortune in North Carolina. Again, the connection between Raleigh and North Carolina. He invested $100,000 to build a resort hotel and construct an electric streetcar line that would connect Raleigh to Memphis using that older, the original narrow gauge railroad track. The Raleigh Springs Inn opened in 1892. It was 3 stories high. It was painted 2 shades of green, and it had a very long veranda where people could go out and sit on the porch and sip the mineral water. Unfortunately, despite these lavish accommodations, fewer guests arrived than was expected, and the inn closed in 1903. There are a couple of reasons for this, why people all of a sudden stopped coming to Raleigh for the waters as quickly as they started. First, artesian wells have been discovered in Memphis. Fresh water is in Memphis, much fresher than what you were getting from, the various places you could get the wells and so on in Memphis. So there was less of a reason for people to want to come from Memphis to enjoy the springs. And at the same time, this notion that this could heal all manner of problems, people stopped believing that because it wasn't working. No more babies were brought back to life. Nobody's sickness was cured from this. And so people began to not believe in the healing powers of